So 3 things are extremely important for answer writing. They are active reading, framework building, brainstorming and practice. So what is active reading? Active reading is like we obviously read and we try to remember the things that we read. Like, okay, you are reading a piece of material for your mains paper and you try to remember those things. But that is not what active reading means. What I did was I used to read a fact or a stat or an example and I used to imaginarily think, how can I use that in my answers? So that is what active reading means. Active reading means how you are going to read, how you are going to use what you are reading in your answers. That is what active reading means. How does this help in answer writing? This helps because answer writing is all about that, getting that element of spontaneity in you, and also attending to unknown questions and also bringing all your knowledge onto the paper on that day. How does that happen? It happens through active reading. When you are reading any piece of material, don't just read to remember, but also read to show how you are going to, actually use it in the answers. So for instance, if I can give an example, you are reading something like a festival in art and culture. You are just reading the details and all such things. Don't just passively read them, but try to link how am I going to use it. Okay, you are reading a festival of Northeast India. I will be able to use this particular example when a question is asked in internal security or society about Northeast India. That is, despite immense potential, Northeast India has not been able to so and so. Such question is there. So here, despite immense potential of Northeast India is one part of the question. Here you can actually use that point. Immense potential is you can use how cultural elements like these festivals that Northeast India has, even though it is rich in cultural elements, still Northeast India has not been able to achieve its potential. So something like that. So this applies for each and everything that you study. That is, any stat, any fact, any example or any point that you're reading, you have to actively link to any each and every part of the syllabus. That helps you in summoning the points easily when you're actually writing the answer in the exam hall. So this, you will not realize its importance when you're doing it, but when in the examination hall you're faced with questions and you're going to write 20 questions, then you'll be able to actually summon the number of points over there. So please try to adopt this active reading. Active reading is not just reading for the sake of remembering, but also reading in the sense that you will be able to, you are analyzing how am I going to use this particular point in the actual exam. You will only imaginarily think of questions and you will only imaginarily use those points in the questions asked. So that is what active reading means. And next is framework building. So what is framework building? And why is it important? So frameworks is that what happens is that the reason why many people score less marks in mains is that it's not because they don't have knowledge, it's not because they have not read sufficiently, it's because they have not built the systematic frameworks for every subject or every topic of the syllabus that they can readily use in examination hall. So what do I mean by framework building? For instance, there is something like a question on disaster management, okay, or handling a disaster. So what happens is that you read a lot of material about handling a disaster, and when suddenly a question is asked in the exam, that is how do you handle a particular disaster or what measures can be taken, you have so many points but you are not going to write them in a systematic way, or even if you are going to write them, your points will be repetitive in nature and they are not going to be of diversity will not be there. So instead you can develop some kind of framework for this. What is that framework? LRR, that is laws, rules and regulations. What are the laws, rules and regulations that are present to handle that particular disaster? That is one point. Second is institutional. What are the institutional measures that are there to handle that particular disaster? For instance, something related to coastal areas, you can write something like Coastal Zone Management Authority. That is one example of institutional thing. And third you can write is community oriented measures. That is how community together are handling the disaster. For instance, there is something called Apada Mitra scheme that is there. Those are nothing but they are community based volunteers who are going to help you in any disaster. So that is one example. And then there is global level efforts. Global level efforts are nothing but how countries together are handling such disasters. For instance, there is something called Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure that India has helmed. It's nothing but it is basically to kind of handle disaster kind of situation. So that is another example. And the other point you can write is something like technological. For instance, how satellite technology or any kind of supercomputing technology is being utilized to kind of predict disasters. So this is what I call framework. When you are having frameworks like this for every topic of the syllabus, what happens is that it becomes really easy for you to make notes, one, because you can make notes in this format, two, revise easily, because when you are revising, you need not remember each and every point. You can easily revise on these lines. And third is, write answers quickly, because you will be able to recall the points in this order and you need not put much effort into those things. So that is another thing. And also your answers will be diversified. Diversity is very important in answers. So here no one point is similar to the other. Like you have covered legal thing, you have covered institutional aspect, you have covered community aspect, you have covered global level aspect and technological aspect. So this is how you make frameworks for each and every part of the syllabus. This is just an example for disaster management, but that you can do for every part of the syllabus. For instance, something like when you're reading, a spectrum for modern India, there is something called British impact of British on economic impacts of British, something as basic as that. So when you're reading the whole material, you have to framework it in the sense that, okay, British's economic impact on industries, British's economic impact on agriculture, British's economic impact on services. What does services include? Artisans and everybody. British's economic impact on tribal economy, British's economic impact on food security, British's economic impact on exports and all such things. So when you're reading the piece of material in this way, that is frameworked in this manner, it becomes really easy for you to read, organize your thoughts and put those thoughts onto the paper. So that is what I mean by framework building. People mostly focus on this aspect and this aspect, but people don't do these two aspects a lot. But I feel these two aspects are extremely important because active reading will again help you to come up with points in the examination hall as quickly as possible, and framework building is important for these reasons. That is important. And then obviously brainstorming and practice is non-negotiable. You have to write 3-hour papers, 7 papers, 9 papers in total, including the language papers, and for that a lot of practice is needed, a lot of brainstorming is needed, and also the papers are like, you have GS1 in the morning, GS2 in the afternoon. A lot of resilience is needed in that sense. You feel like giving up, but you cannot. So in that sense, practice and brainstorming is important. What do I mean by brainstorming? Brainstorming is nothing but I use it to take up topper copies every day. Like all toppers, right from top ranks to all ranks, I use it to take up topper copies that were there in the websites, and then I use it to see the question. After seeing the question, I used to think for myself, okay, what will I write? Just quick points in my mind, and then I use it to check my thoughts with the answer that is given in the paper. In this way, what happens is that unconsciously or subconsciously, you will learn things. You will learn things of like, what is a good answer? Okay, why did this topper score good marks? And how are they substantiating their points? How many examples are they writing? How many points are they writing? All such things. All such things are extremely important, and that is what brainstorming means, and it is extremely important exercise. Practice is also important, but brainstorming is important for you to order your thoughts again and put these two things into perspective. So that is what the components of answer writing are basically. And apart from that, I also wanted to tell you what are the good, for every paper, GS1, GS2, GS3 or GS4, what happens is that people tend to see all the papers in a similar fashion. Like, okay, all GS papers are the same. Maybe people differentiate ethics a bit, but they see GS1 is same, GS2 is same and GS3 is same. And in fact, within that, people think that, the way you write history answer should be similar to the way you write geography answer or whatever. But in my opinion, that is not the case. Each paper is different, and within that, each subpart or subject is different. So each paper, is different. The way you write answers for each paper is different. And within each paper, each subject requires different preparation. So what do I mean by this? Basically, there is something called GS1. In GS1, you have history, art and culture and these subjects. So how do you write a good answer, good history answer or good art and culture answer? What are the essential elements of a good history answer or art and culture answer? So in my opinion, for history, what is required is very specific examples. Very specific examples. So what do I mean by very specific examples? Did you see last year's papers, mains papers? Mains papers, have you seen them? So do you remember any history questions from last year mains papers? Any question that was asked? The first question probably. It was something like geography and history, interrelation between geography and history was the question. So what I did was, I had to quote very specific examples, right? So in that, what I did was, I quoted something like, in the question, how are history and geography related? I quoted something like coastal areas, how coastal areas impacted the history of that area, and in that I quoted obviously Cholas. But I didn't just quote Cholas, I mentioned the port name, which was nothing but Puhar or Kaveripatnam. So what happens is that people stop at this level. That is, people write coastal areas, people mention about Cholas, but people don't mention the port or something of this very specific nature. Also something like when you're writing something like Jaladurga is another example. What is Jaladurga? Jaladurga was erstwhile capital of Magadhan Empire, Mauryan Empire. So here I mentioned the rivers also. Rivers that formed this particular capital. So what happens is that most people stop at here. They definitely mention coastal areas, they definitely do give the example of Cholas, but they don't give this specific example. Example, the port of Puhar or the port of Kaveripatnam. What happens is that this is what differentiates your answer. Right, you know, this specific example is what is going to differentiate your answer. If you're going to include such specific examples in your history answers, you're definitely going to get, you know, an additional mark or an additional half mark or something in every question. I think this is what has differentiated me, differentiated my answers, my history answers from others. Also, I remember another question in the same year, which was about some kind of technological contribution of Delhi Sultanate. So it was for a 15 marker. So people felt that it was a difficult question. People felt that there was not enough material. But I remember quoting very specific examples again. For instance, I remember quoting Feroz Shah Tughlaq's efforts in building canals. So this I quoted under agricultural technology. So all such things. This is what I mean by specific examples. Specificity is important. When you mention something like Feroz Shah Tughlaq or when you mention something like Puhar, obviously the examiner is going to understand that you have some specific set of knowledge, and that is how it is going to be rewarded in history at least. That is what I've observed. And then I'll also come to geography. Apart from history, there is geography in paper 1. So in geography, there are two sets of questions basically. One is traditional questions, the other is dynamic questions. So what do I mean by traditional questions? Traditional questions are ones that test your conceptual clarity or understanding of the subject, that is it. Example, there are questions like the last year when I have written the paper, there was questions on fjords. And previously there have been questions on air masses and all such things, or something like monsoon. These are very traditional questions. In the sense, you can easily, read them from any book, build some conceptual clarity and then write an answer on it. Like you can take up something like, what do you say? You can take up something like Gocheng Liang or something like BMFIS or even NCRTs. You can read these concepts and you can replicate them in the exam. So that is what traditional questions means. They don't test your, complete holistic understanding or anything. You just have to read them and you have to replicate them. But there are something like dynamic questions. These are increasing in geography this year. What do you mean by dynamic questions? They have something like environmental aspect attached to them, right? For instance, questions related to climate change, like how climate change impacts food security, or all such things. These are what I call the dynamic questions. What do I call the dynamic questions? Because these are happening. These concepts are happening. Something like climate change is in the news and then they are linking it to various topics. How does climate change impact food security, or how does climate change impact something like water bodies and all such things. So this is what I call dynamic aspects, and for this you need a lot of value addition. So value addition in the sense you can collect specific examples or you can collect specific facts from multiple sources, like you can take them from newspapers, you can take them from magazines like Down to Earth, you can take them from topper notes, or you can take them from current affairs compilations. So in geography, what happens is that while traditional questions can be dealt by somebody who has thoroughly read their geography concepts or thoroughly read a book, dynamic questions are going to be the decider. So for that, value addition becomes extremely important, and like I mentioned, these are the sources from where you can collect value addition for geography dynamic kind of questions. So this is something pertaining to geography, and then I'll come to society in paper 1. So society, what I feel is like terminology becomes extremely important. You have to use society specific terminology. So what do I mean by society specific terminology? I'll just give you some examples of the words or terminology, you will understand. First is like socialization, to start off with a basic term. So when you're writing something like a society question, instead of using the term parenting, use the term socialization. That is a society specific term. These are the kind of terms you have to use. Second is identity crisis, another example, another term. Third is intersectionality of vulnerabilities. So like this, these are the society specific terms that I meant to say. I think I've written some of them also. I'll just try to quote them over here. Broken window syndrome. So you will you need to look for these terms in newspapers and topper copies and topper notes. You will find these terms. And all such things. So in society, terminology is the first key aspect of writing a good society answer. You cannot write society like any other answer. You cannot substitute the term, socialization with parenting. Socialization has to be socialization. And when you're writing something like intersectionality of vulnerabilities, that is also extremely important. So first key aspect is terminologies. And the second thing I would say is, well, again, examples, though I'm quoting it everywhere, examples are extremely important. And what examples? What happens is that we tend to usually use examples that everybody uses. For instance, when there is a question on regionalism, everybody quotes Khalistan issue as an example, right? But that is a very basic thing that everybody does. How do you differentiate your answer from what others are writing? So you quote very specific examples. In this, what you can quote is something like demands for inclusion of languages in 8th schedule is also something manifestation of regionalism. Demands for inclusion of languages in 8th schedule. So this is just one example of how you are going to differentiate your answer. everybody writes examples, but don't write the same examples that are obvious. Khalistan issue is a very obvious example of regionalism that everybody is going to include. You have to differentiate your answer from everybody, and for that you have to write some different example or specific example and a very new example. This is something that you've been reading in newspapers, I guess, like demands for inclusion of Tulu language in 8th schedule and all such things. This is very dynamic example also. This has been in use since a long time, but this one is a new example. So these kind of things make your society answers a little different. One is terminology, definitely, and second is examples. Within examples, you have to be very specific about the kind of examples you are using, not the examples that everybody uses, but very dynamic and very new examples that the examiner might appreciate. So that is other thing. And next, this is about paper 1, GS paper 1. If you have any questions specific to GS paper 1, probably we can take them up now. Pages from where you take the value addition or something like that?
How many pages you have to write? Is there any particular pages, like only 1 or 2 pages or something else?
Okay, I mean they give you the fixed format, right? For 10 markers you have to write for 2 pages. Okay. For 15 markers they give you 3 pages. No, in the booklet that is provided to you, they have a fixed space. Okay. 10 marker question is for 2 pages. Okay. 15 marker question is for 3 pages. So that is the number of pages you have to write. So that is there, that they have given you. You don't have any choice to increase the question, increase the pages or anything. They have given you a fixed format, fixed pages. So that is there. Any other thing?
Is mapping helpful for writing answers on geography?
Yeah, mapping is definitely important in geography, but I don't think you have to do it purposefully, right? Even if the question is not demanding, just because it's a geography question, you need not incorporate maps for every question. You have to see where the maps are extremely important. For instance, last year there was a question on something like natural vegetation of India, I guess. Natural vegetation of India. This was a question where map was definitely needed. You cannot show all the different kinds of vegetation that are present in India without a map. So I definitely used a map. So it is up to you, see where the maps are extremely required. If they are extremely important, you have to incorporate them. Otherwise, content is always the king in mains. Even if you are not substantiating your answers with diagrams and maps, you will be rewarded. I didn't use many maps or many diagrams. I was sticking to my content, and where it was extremely essential, I used it. So that was there. Okay, so okay, frameworks is basically, it's about, you have to identify the topics where you can prepare frameworks for. For instance, there is something like climate change and water bodies is a favorite issue of UPSC. Like, how does climate change impact water bodies? For that, I had a framework in mind. Water bodies include how does climate change impact cryosphere? That is one part. Second is how does climate change impact ocean currents? That is second point you can write. Third is how does climate change impact groundwater? How does climate change impact glaciers? How does climate change impact overall hydrological cycle? So these things. So this is how I prepared a framework, and it was for, I used to look at the previous year papers and I used to get an idea on what questions can be probably asked. This was one area I prepared, and then something on climate change and agriculture is also another favorite area of UPSC. Something like climate change and food security is another favorite area. So I used to take up 4 or 5 main issues, and then I used to prepare frameworks like this. So that is how it worked. Any other questions?